Yeah, thank you all for sticking around to the end. I don't think I have really anything more to say. It's all been said for the last 2 days, but maybe I can provide a bit of a synthesis. So back in 2010, colleagues and I tried to summarize the key lessons that we got out of IPY4, and we introduced this concept of a data ecosystem. I'm sure we weren't the first people to use the term, but it was pretty novel at the time. We thought it was pretty clever. And now everything's called an ecosystem. All systems are called ecosystem. It's even become somewhat of a cliche, I would say. And I'm not sure they actually get the point. I could talk at length about the concept, but suffice it to say that healthy ecosystems tend to be very diverse, intricately interconnected, and supported through complex symbiosis. And so just keep these concepts in mind as sort of goals that I think we were trying to achieve and sort of themes for this talk. So there's a lot I could talk about, but I'm just going to hit on 4 topics briefly. Preservation, other ways of knowing and co-production, interdisciplinary interoperability, and global coordination. So first off, preservation and stewardship. I used to really emphasize the stewardship piece, and that remains, of course, super critical, but we can't forget the basic preservation. It's pretty black and white, either the data are accessible or they're not. And we certainly need the relevant metadata. You need to have all the right context and all the good stuff of stewardship. But the first step is simply to save the data. And in times of crisis, I think we really need to go back to first principles, and we also need to rely on our friends. So this is a slide I presented at the penultimate conference of IPY about 15 years ago, and it shows an assessment of how we were doing in meeting the requirements of the IPY data policy. We weren't doing very well. And frankly, in the last IPY, we were so concerned about just getting the data from the researchers in the first place that I think preservation was a bit overlooked. Unfortunately, I'm not sure we're doing all that much better today, especially in preparation for a major disaster. I mean, we just heard about all the Russian data that is not available. And for example, you might be familiar with the Data One network, pretty extensive network. Only a quarter of the partners take advantage of the built-in replication service. They could be replicating their data very easily, but they're not. Now, don't get me wrong. I think most data centers probably have offsite backups, but that's not the same as a proper mirror with functionality, containerized or what have you, on another continent under another governance and funding scheme, which is really what we need to be thinking about. So, some first lessons. Get yourself some locks buddies. Locks, lots of copies, keep stuff safe. It's both a concept and a suite of software. I'm talking more about the concept. The software is really more geared towards sort of library systems. It's not really geared to handling the sort of tera and petabytes of data that we're talking about. But the concept is solid. And so I think it should be a goal that IPY5 data should be in a repository with an offsite mirror. And I use the term mirror, distinguished from just a backup. And we need to be considering alternate forms of funding. We need to be thinking about how the private sector plays in here. Cloud services are helpful, but they're also capricious. How does this work? How does this fit in? We need to be thinking about the roles of philanthropy. Philanthropy is asking how to help. They don't know what to do. And all of this really needs international coordination and governance to ensure this proper mirroring. I think that the question about looking on Peter's work, looking even further back, it's interesting to note that the data from the first IPY was not fully available as a whole until 125 years later. The data from the second IPY in 1932 was largely lost because of World War II. My former boss, Roger Berry, managed to find a bunch of it, not all of it, but a bunch of it, I think at the Danish Met Service, but not until well into the 2000s. The third IPY, sometimes called the International Geophysical Year, led to the creation of the World Data Centers. And what was cool about the world data centers that I think we forget sometimes is that they were established explicitly to share data across the Iron Curtain. For every WDCA, so for example, I used to work at the WDCA for glaciology in the United States, there was a WDCB in the Soviet Union, and they were meant to be mirrors of each other, you know, in the old-fashioned way that they were sort of doing that. So it was explicitly designed for science to transcend politics. So there are some lessons, I think, from the past, even though they were dealing with simpler data. This is somewhat of an aside, but I need to give a plug for a project that is coming out of the Earth Science Information Partners, an organization I run. The repository crisis scorecards are meant to measure how resilient a repository might be in its normal state and then during certain crises. And not just political crises, you know, cyber attacks, natural disasters, all sorts of crises. So this includes a measure of how well a repository might weather a particular crisis. How much societal impact a missing repository would have. The scorecards are based, don't worry about that. Sorry, I'm reading from a slide from Joseph Gum, who's the lead on this. There are 3 parts to the repository crisis scorecards. A fact-finding pre-worksheet to set the scene, and then 2 scorecards, the repository resilience scorecard, which is organized around the idea of whether a repository can survive a crisis and fulfill its mission, and then the data impact and recovery scorecard, which covers the ideas of data set completeness and third-party impact, specifically whether another organization is able to make sense of the deposits and continue the mission of the impacted repository. So we have a small grant from the Sloan Foundation to continue this work and to flesh it out. And so we're looking for people to complete the scorecard. You can do it anonymously, but we would like to also get your feedback and figure out how we can improve it and improve your repositories. And we're also establishing some focus groups to explore some of this stuff in more detail. So check this out. The project is just launching. We have small stipends to help you, if it helps for you to participate in the focus group or to complete the scorecards. So, addressing crises. Second topic, Indigenous knowledge and co-production. We heard a fair amount about this yesterday. This is a super critical and also very complex issue. This sort of knowledge provides essential insights, and I think the Arctic community in particular has thought about this deeper and longer than most. I see this as an example of symbiosis, you know, the symbiosis of Western science and Indigenous knowledge. And Western appreciation of Indigenous knowledge has matured a lot since IPY4, but we still have much to learn, especially about co-production and how to do it. The IPY4 data policy was, I think, pioneering in its explicit consideration of local and Indigenous rights, but it said virtually nothing about how to do it. And frankly, it was not co-produced. We had allies involved, but we did not have direct Indigenous participation in the policy. The IASK data statement says a bit more, and of course, we now have the CARE principles, which are very helpful and more globally oriented. But implementing good practice, as Chantel emphasized yesterday, is still very much a work in progress. Now moving briefly to the more technical side of things, interdisciplinary interoperability. I think the polar data community actually has a pretty solid history here, although of course there's a lot of work to be done. But in many ways, we should just keep doing what we're doing, but do it more, do it better. And one thing we've learned for sure is that using the same standard does not make you interoperable, because it's this ongoing process of collaboration. This is a figure created by Peter Pulsifer for the first IPY, in the first IPY workshop in 2006, when we were just sort of trying to figure this out. And it lays out a vision of what we were thinking back in the day. In some ways, this vision has been realized through polar data search at some level, but we also have a ways to go, especially when we think of what Don was talking about in terms of usage, not just discovery. And so, yeah, we need to extend beyond discovery to ensure interoperable use, which is a bigger challenge. I think this project, World Fair, which you might have heard of, that was led by RDA and CODATA, may provide a basis for this, particularly through this standard or suite of standards, the cross-domain interoperability framework. World Fair was a pilot program that had 11 different case studies. Those are the little petals on the flowers from different disciplines that were exploring how to make data more fair, and that's what led to this CDIF standard. And now CODATA is doing something they're calling World Fair Plus. I think we should just keep calling it World Fair to address other domain areas. And I think this is something the polar community might want to consider. And I think that we might be able to get explicit funding for this. The European Commission is keen on this, and a number of countries are in this. So this is something we might want to think about. Going back to this figure, another thing we really realized early on is this kind of network requires more than the technology. It also requires networks of trust and quality to build social networks. So I presented this slide first in 2007, and social networks were a buzz in 2007, and somehow they became social media, and the whole world just went to crap. But networks of humans is what helps establish trust, and that's trust really at many levels is central to interoperability. And this is partly achieved through what I call glocalism. I think Chantel, I don't know if she was just tripping on her tongue or if she actually meant this, but this is a concept, you'll see it in the literature. It's not super common. It probably got most traction in the business world with the idea of trying to address local needs with global products. Selling a Big Mac in a different country is a little bit different than selling it in, the Mac Royal in France. Royale with cheese. That's right. Yeah. Pulp Fiction reference. But I think it works well for data concerns too. It's not enough to make your data or metadata available in the preferred format of a different user. You also have to recognize their particular context and their culture. And this is obviously key when we're dealing with Indigenous knowledge. And so the bottom line is that data professionals need to play at multiple scales at once. You need to be working at your local level, you need to be working at your regional level, and in the global level like this. And you need to be doing it all the time in conjunction with each other. And so this relates closely to my final topic. Interoperability and coordination go hand in hand. Indeed, what we're really talking about is building community. And the polar community is a community. That's one of, I think, the big legacies out of IPY4 is, this is the 6th Polar Data Forum. We have an Arctic Data Committee, which we did not have before IPY. We have the bridging across the poles. So there are a lot of lessons here, I think, on this community, but and the community needs to become more robust and more extensive. And one thing I think is we really need to engage with semantic experts. We heard some about that yesterday. Repositories need to work with semantic experts, but then also an inclusive community of researchers, operators, local and Indigenous practitioners, rights holders to define and clarify terminology. It's a group exercise. The semantic experts, if they run off on their own, they'll do something lovely that is completely unusable. And so it's really important, but they can help guide a community in doing something that is truly useful. Secondly, don't underestimate the need for ongoing planning. The polar community does a lot of planning, but data planning often seems somewhat secondary. When data professionals, researchers, and others plan their data management as part of a project, it's a lot easier for the data to be born fair, to emerge fair. And really, that's a kind of co-design, is when you're working with the data professionals and the researchers and everybody all together. And it's an ongoing process. As Eisenhower said, plans are worthless, but planning is essential. So it's not just a one and done thing. And then finally, you know, we get hung up about standards, and I really like Jonathan's talk because this is the future. We won't have to rely quite as much on standards but we will still need to rely on them, of course. But we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You know, you just have to have enough sort of working consensus to move forward. So really, some final lessons looking forward. Foster diversity, interconnection, and symbiosis. And start now. We need to be thinking about IPY5 now. That's what Peter was saying. We need to know how the data will be managed and preserved when IPY5 starts, and where it will continue, you know, well after that. That includes appropriate policy and governance structures, which we may have, but we need to sort of sort that out. So this is part of what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. We now have formal representation in the IPY planning group, me, representing the P2G group and wearing the hat of CODATA. And then we're proposing a data task group. We've submitted a proposal for a data task group. I'm just operating on the assumption that it will be approved, and that's what we're launching tomorrow. And the data task group is open to all. We need to be developing these co-production strategies. And I think we really, the Indigenous knowledge work is a whole big project in its own right. And there is already a task group on Indigenous knowledge, and so we need to be thinking about how we interact with them. And I've only begun to scratch that. The data task group in and of itself will not be able to address this fully. So then just a message to researchers, as they get going, when they start launching their IPY projects, they need to identify and engage with the repository in advance now to develop their data management plans. Again, this is part of co-design. Repositories, on the flip side, need to be engaging with data providers. I really liked Alice's talk about how, you know, she was in the field working with the data providers. I think that's essential. And of course, you know, thinking about working with your users, but also other data professionals. So we learn from each other. That's the purpose of this sort of meeting. Build networks, work locally. And then funders, of course, funders are key in all of this. They need to be funding the data management, but they also need to be encouraging and enabling the data professionals to collaborate with the relevant researchers and with each other. That funding this collaboration is a key part of this, that I think that they often don't see, and so we need to get that message to them. And then finally, just science needs to stand up for itself. Thinking about those historic examples, continue to reach across borders. Data sharing is a very tangible way to do that. Data sharing is how science collaboration works. You know, we need to be thinking about the long game. And ultimately, like I say, it's about building networks and being pragmatic. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think that really did a great job summarizing what we do well as a community and where we have room for improvement. But before I cut you loose, is there questions from, we got one Ria in the back. All the steps.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much, and a few things that can be also incorporated in the Polar Archive if that realized. And I really want to be part of this. It sounds amazing. I can't wait for tomorrow. Just a question, like, would humanities data be part of the portal? Like, I know they are already talking about artists going on the Polar here, so will that all be included? We're probably talking about that tomorrow. And looking at social media, Facebook, Twitter, Blue Sky, will that also be part of the repository? But I'm not sure. This is probably discussed tomorrow.
Well, we're not talking about a single portal, a single repository. We're talking about a community collaboration that will ensure that all the IPY5 data are preserved, shared, and interoperable. Humanities data should be part of that. I honestly don't know how much emphasis there has been on that in current IPY planning. Probably a little. I know in the last IPY art was part of it. And I think art is really effective at messaging in ways that, dry scientific talks don't always do, especially communicating the value of what we're doing to the community. So yes. Regarding social networks, social media, I think a key piece, and we will talk about this tomorrow, is the messaging again. So, and messaging to scientists, the value of why they need to be working with their friendly neighbor data management, but also to the broader community. So, but social media is just a means to an end, right? It's not the end in its own right. And who knows how we'll be doing this, in 7 years from now. They'll be the new TikTok or whatever. But and so short answer, I guess, is yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yep, Masaki. Sorry. Thank you for, thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for reviewing the previous IPY. It is uncertain how to pursue the next IPY for the project. How to organize the project internationally. The previous time, the joint committee of ICSU and WMO gathered, compiled the induce project from individual country or individual research group. So after finishing the IPY campaign, our committee, data committee, evaluates the openness of the data for each individual projects. So it is uncertain of the project procedure, but it's necessary from tomorrow. We discuss about the capability of the collaboration of the in legally and technically about the infrastructure for data sharing and openness.
Yeah,
It's
I agree.
necessary for that.
Yeah. Sorry, did you have more? So, and I'll say more about this tomorrow, but first off, the IPY planning is just getting kicked off. They have a planning group that has representatives from a bunch of global bodies. We don't know what the actual IPY will look like. I am assuming, perhaps rashly, that there will be a similar sort of framework as last time, where there'll be a bunch of endorsed projects that are collaborating in some way. Some of you may remember the honeycomb diagram. So something akin to that, but I don't know for sure. And then the other thing is the task group is meant to be a short-term thing. We will exist for 16 months or so, I think is the schedule I put together. And it's to develop an initial strategy. We don't have the full goals and objectives of IPY yet, so how can we have a full-blown data strategy? But we do know that we have resources in hand, and we know how to do certain things, and we want to get those things in the view of the planning committee. So the planning committee is aware of all the stuff that we're already doing, and that they are using them effectively. I think that's really the purpose of the task group at this point. Whether there becomes a data committee, a separate thing or not, that's up in the air. Maybe we don't need that since we have SCADM and ADC. Whether there's a new policy, we don't know. It depends on, again, the objectives of IPY. Maybe we can get by with the IS data statement and the SCADM data policy. I think those are all TBD. So at this point, we're just sort of setting the stage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other last-minute questions for Mark? No? Awesome. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Appreciate it. Give him another round of applause.